Hey, it's Rich from Planet PE, and today's video is going to be looking at a method of training which is going to help all of you out there that play things like football, basketball, netball, and any game activity. So let's have a look at what we call fartlek training. So if you are new to the channel, please make sure you like and subscribe and all that sort of jazz. And what we're going to look at is this idea of a continuous version of training, which is going to help you if you are coming into your season. Now, lots of you will be maybe going on continuous runs, doing that continuous training method that we looked at in the last video, but you might find that that first game is a little bit difficult. So let's have a look at explaining why that might be and how fartlek training is going to help you when the season eventually begins. So what is fartlek training? Well, fartlek training is a Swedish model of training, and it actually means speed play in Swedish. It's non-stop, so it is another continuous form of training. But what the difference is between when we looked at continuous training being a steady pace is that actually in fartlek training, we're constantly going to vary the pace or the intensity we work at. Now, if you think about, let's say, a game of football, I might run, I might sprint, I might jog, I might walk, I might stand still. Well, let's take that standing still out because that wouldn't be a non-stop form of training. So let's think about all of those things that you do in your sport when you're actually exercising or when you're playing the game. So we're going to be changing the intensity all the time. And that's what we're trying to do in fartlek training. So here's one of the advantages, is that it actually mimics what you do in your activity. So if I was a netballer, I'm going to have periods where I'm sprinting. There's going to be periods when I'm jogging. There's going to be periods when I'm walking. Exactly the same as a footballer, same as a rugby player, same as a basketballer. So that's why it's really, really good for our games players to go and use. So when we're training and when we're starting to think about getting back into training as the season arrives, maybe don't just go for a run, but actually think about how you might be able to implement this into your training. So when you're going for a run, what could you use to try and think about, well, I'm going to run at a certain pace to that point, or I'm going to maybe walk to that point. So think about some real simple things. If you're doing it on your court, so your football pitch, your basketball court, your netball court, things like that, use the lines. So you might sprint to the halfway line. You might jog to the baseline. You might then walk across the sideline and then jog all the way up that far line. Now, lots of us aren't going to have access to that, particularly at the moment, particularly where we are down in lockdown and it's going to be more difficult. So here's a tip for you. Why not use lampposts or the street lights in your road? So you can look at your road and there might be on your side of the street maybe 6 or 7 lampposts. Use each one of them as a different intensity. So you might walk to the first lamppost. You might jog at, let's say, 50% of your maximum speed to the second one. You might sprint to the third one and then walk again, maybe jog 2, sprint 1, walk another one. And that therefore would be a fartlek session. Another way you can do it is by changing the terrain. So you might live close to a field, you might live where there's lots of hills. All of those changes in terrain are going to mean that you're going to have to train or run or walk or sprint or whatever at a different intensity. So if I was going to run up a hill, I'm clearly going to go a bit slower because it's going to be quite difficult. I'm going to go faster on the downhill. I'm also going to change between running on a hill, running on concrete, running on gravel. All those different changes of terrain are also included in what we look at as being fartlek training. So just like when we looked at continuous training, we're trying to make it last for 20 minutes at least. What we're doing differently to continuous training though, is that we're not just going at a steady pace. It's gonna be, if I was looking at your heart rates when you do it, you would see it constantly kind of going up and down because you're changing the intensity which matches what you're trying to do in your sport. So footballers out there, netballers out there, basketballers, rugby players, any game activities, please make sure that if you're looking at trying to get fit for your sport, you're gonna use fartlek training. So what are the advantages and the disadvantages of doing fartlek training? So there's advantages. when we're doing fartlek training, we are working both the aerobic and the anaerobic systems, because we're changing the intensities, because we're going to have some periods of quite slow movement and then some quite quick ballistic ones. So that's a good thing. It matches the requirements of our sport. Again, another really, really good example. And that third one is, again, like we said before, it's good for games players. What are the negatives? There's not many, because it's cheap. It doesn't really require you to need many things to go and do, whereas many of the training methods do. The only thing I'd say is, actually, if you're not living anywhere that has different terrains or hills, things like that, it might be difficult for you to vary the intensity you're working at. That's why you need to think about maybe planning your distances or times of how far you're going to run for, and then what intensity it's going to be at different points in your run. So there we go. That question at the start of what is fartlek training, really quickly, speed play in Swedish, changes of terrain, changes of intensity, and it's really, really good for games players. So if you're new, please make sure, like you said, watch the other videos that you see about training, like, subscribe, and again, check us out on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe on here. Thanks for watching.